Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. We could start finding your seats. We're going to get going, particularly because our online people are on a schedule as well. And so we want to respect those who are watching online. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Peter Slayton. I am the social media manager for the LCMS. I will be joined by Dr. Kevin Armbrust, who is the director of editorial services. We're both in the communications department here. We're going to talk to you today about life issues and the gospel in the metaverse, which, how many of you have heard of the word metaverse? Let's start there. It's totally okay if you haven't. That's actually part of what we're doing here, is kind of walking through terms and definitions. And language and definitions are important. We are at the Life Ministry Conference, and I'm willing to bet you guys recognize how important language is and the words that we use, particularly in how it causes us to perceive reality. So if I were to say it's just a fetus, what would you think I am attempting to communicate by phrasing something in that way?
It's not important.
Not important, not human. What was that back there? Pro-abortion. Yeah. I have intentionally chosen language to define a reality in a particular way to influence you in how you think about that. And we are in the life arena. We are very used to language being used in this way, whether it's being weaponized against us, whether it's simply we're trying to shift the argument in a particular direction. So you guys are used to this. You know this is the way things work. So what we're going to talk about today is one of the areas in which language is being intentionally used to shift our perceptions of reality itself. And in this setting, we're going to talk about reality and life a little bit interchangeably. So a lot of the quotes that I'm going to put up here and share with you are specifically focusing on reality. But we all know you can't talk about reality without also acknowledging life itself, right? Reality and life pretty much go hand in hand. So those are the big ideas that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to start off with my portion. We're going to talk about the digital reality of the metaverse, and we will start by talking about what that is. Kevin will come up next and talk about reality and the New Testament. And then we're going to talk about, okay, now that we've seen how these two things are being talked about, how reality is being talked about in our world and how scripture talks about reality, let's talk about how the church can engage in this conversation productively and give some examples of how we already are, perhaps not in the best ways. At any point, you guys are free to raise your hands and ask questions. I know we have live online viewers. You guys are also welcome to, I can actually look at our online viewers here. I keep forgetting, there's the camera. You guys can ask us questions too. I've got someone feeding those to me. So feel free to make this more of a conversation in addition to the presentation. All right, first of all, definitions and terms. It's very important to talk about what it is that we're actually talking about. So here's a definition that I picked. There are several definitions available to you. I will point out that this definition is already outdated because the pace of technology moves so quickly. But the metaverse can be considered any mixed reality realm that, while rooted in real life, lets participants collaborate and transact in immersive virtual spaces via augmented reality and virtual reality headsets and controllers. Here's where this is no longer entirely accurate. You can also put on full body suits and interact and like helmets, and you're now like full body immersion in this reality. It's not just your headset and your controllers anymore. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But it's this mixing of real life and technology. And even as I say real life and technology, I'm kind of giving away the lead a little bit here, aren't I? Yeah. Once again, perception matters. Language influences our perceptions, and we want to make sure we are aware of when the language is being changed to try and shift our perception of a thing. So let's talk about the movers and shakers in the arena of the metaverse. This is Mark Zuckerberg. If you don't know who that is, he's the founder of Facebook, the largest social media network in the world. I believe they've just passed 3 billion monthly active users, or 2.5. They're like way up there now. It's been renamed Meta because they have multiple products under that heading, but I'm sure if you watch the media or social media, you've at least heard of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Oculus, which is their Metaverse one, and I almost forgot what it was, which is ironic given that this is a Metaverse presentation. But what I want to do is share quotes from the individuals who are the architects, who are the funders, who are the movers and shakers behind the Metaverse, using their own words, telling you, here's what we're trying to do with this. Here's our preferred future. Here's where we're wanting to go. So this is Mark Zuckerberg. We feel like we are there with other people in a way that we can't feel in our digital experiences today. We'll be able to see things around us, touch things with our hands. The important thing about this quote is Mark is beginning to define reality based on experience, what you can feel, what you can touch, what you can see. That's what reality is. And hey, if you can do that in your digital experiences, well, we're starting to move into them being just as real as where we are now. Next, we have Cam Mullins, somebody I would be very surprised if anybody had heard of. I've never heard of them. The CEO of a virtual reality dating service called Never Met. Just let that sink in. A dating service called Never Met. Physical attraction will become one of several factors rather than the primary way people connect. Taking virtual forms can allow users to feel like their best self. Relationships entirely based on virtual reality, moving away from, and it's not just physical attraction being the primary way, he's also talking about physical itself. And then we have this idea that this projection of yourself can actually be your best self, or can we say your real self? We see this argument already happening in our world today, don't we? It's been going on for a while. My real self, my genuine identity, well, is this other gender that I truly feel deep down inside of me. Virtual reality, well, that's going to give you the opportunity to fully express that in every way. And now you can express your best self, your truest self. Emi Tamaki is somebody else you will not have heard of, most likely. She's a Japanese developer and a startup founder. She works on the technology behind the metaverse, on the suits and on the headgear and the hand controllers and all that kind of stuff. And what she's working on is wearables that stimulate pain, because she wants to turn the metaverse world into a real world. So think about that for a little bit. We're going to take this digital reality, and if we can add the sensation of pain to this digital reality, it will bring us one step closer to making it an actual reality. Rather ironic to add a real sense into a fake world than a real sense, and that'll make the fake world real. I mean, we're in a really weird circle at this point, but just marinate with that for a little bit. Talked about suits. Here's one of those bodysuits being demoed at a convention. Hamish is a writer. He writes on technology and the metaverse and virtual reality. It's one of his beats as a reporter. He's talking about playing a video game. I could feel the rain falling on my body, a sandstorm whipping past me, and recoil from firearms as I hit targets in a virtual shooting range. So remember, we've gone from, we want to make our reality with Mark Zuckerberg as close to feeling as close as we can to the real world. And if we can add pain to it, if we can add these experiences, because remember, our experience is what's real. How we experience things is actually what defines reality. Here you have somebody, it's not just pain, but these actual sensations of these things going on in a video game that he's able to understand and interpret as sandstorm whipping past me, recoiling from firearms, rainfall on your body. Now that's just a fascinating, wearing something where you're in a game and you can feel rainfall on your body. All right, we're going to sit on this one for a little bit because now we're really moving deeply into what we're talking about here. You may have seen this one when this quote came out, it kind of made the rounds in the media a little bit here and there. Mark Andreessen is another name that you might not have heard, but I guarantee you have used his stuff if you've been on the internet. He is one of the original founders and creators of Netscape, one of the very earliest internet browsers that people used, quite popular. He's known as the Internet King. He's one of the board members for Meta, which owns Facebook, and we had Zuckerberg at the very beginning talking about his thing. Co-founder, he's behind LinkedIn, Twitter, Clubhouse, which is virtual spaces to have audio conversations, and Substack, which is a blogging platform, and there's more to it than that. But a lot of big tech things that he has been behind, that he's one of the primary funders. Here's what he says. Reality has had 5,000 years to get good, and is clearly still woefully lacking for most people. I don't think we should wait another 5,000 years to see if it eventually closes the gap. We should build, and we are building, online worlds that make life and work and love wonderful for everyone. No matter what level of reality deprivation they find themselves in. So he's coined a new term here that has started to make its way into conversations and modern speech, this idea of reality deprivation. He's literally talking about a child in Africa who is in abject poverty will be better off, better served if we give him a VR headset with a perfect world in which he can exist for himself. Because reality's had 5,000 years to get better for that kid. It hasn't gotten better. Let's give him a VR headset and a perfect world there, and that will improve his situation. That's how far the rhetoric has already begun to move. Because remember, all the other quotes we've already talked about, online, virtual reality, we're going to make it just as real as this reality. That's the goal. Jane McGonigal, she's a professor and a game designer. She wrote a book called Reality is Broken. So they recognize there is a problem with reality. I mean, we agree on that. We kind of say, well, the problem is sin that's broken things. She has a different idea of what the problem is. The real world just doesn't offer up as easily the carefully designed pleasures, the thrilling challenges, and the powerful social bonding afforded by virtual environments. Reality doesn't motivate us as effectively. Reality isn't engineered to maximize our potential. Reality wasn't designed from the bottom up to make us happy. Reality has failed us once again. What we need are these virtual worlds that are designed for our personal comfort, our personal pleasure, for our own self-actualization, so we can be our real true selves, as we saw from the dating app example, and designed from the bottom up to do this. Kind of look at that and say, well, we're gonna have a problem with concupiscence here. Anybody designing something without taking into account original sin, but now I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, or ahead of Kevin, I should say. All right, one last quote here. This is Zuckerberg. It's always good but I like to start and end with him because he is the biggest voice in this right now. It's kind of funny. A year ago, everybody was talking about the metaverse. Now hardly anybody is, but it hasn't gone away. And the goals that these individuals have for it has not gone away, and it will make its appearance known in other ways, which is why we're focusing on this. But in talking about the metaverse and what you'll be able to do, you'll be able to create nuanced worlds with just your voice. Now, I don't think he intended it to sound the way we as Christians hear this in a John 1:1 or a Genesis 1:1, and God spoke and it was kind of way. But it's hard not to look at that and be like, okay, you're kind of starting to step on toes here a little bit. There's some issues with that. What I find absolutely hilarious is when he attempted to demo this aspect of the metaverse that they've been creating, it was a comical failure. He kept speaking to like build out his world, and it wasn't understanding him, and it wasn't doing what he wanted to do, and he kept having issues, and the demo was like widely mocked across the internet because this whole I can speak and it'll happen. It didn't quite happen, or it didn't happen in the way he wanted it to. Maybe a hint of things to come in the metaverse perfection that they're attempting to create. This is how language is shifting to get us to think of reality itself in a different way. Let's bring on this other reality. It's just as real as where we are now. Any questions or comments before we move into the next section? I just threw a whole lot of stuff at you guys. Yes.
I really appreciate you updating me because I am so far behind. But it is, and I'll probably review that one. The other thing I'm thinking of it, there's nothing new under the sun. Heavenly Father already goes.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
just my-
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
I am interested to think, and we don't have time to really hear your thoughts perhaps on legitimate and salutary uses of technology, right? The
Mhm.
point of this is not that technology is bad, or even that virtual reality technology is bad, even though those of us who are socially and theologically conservative tend to feel like if it's new, it's bad. We have to fight against that, right?
Yep.
Because Scripture is clear, everything is a gift from God, every created thing, if it is received, the word of God sanctified by prayer. So, as you have done thinking about the metaverse and the technology that feeds into it, have you come across or envisioned what we might think of as legitimate or God-fearing uses or purposes for some of those?
Well, that's part 3 of today's presentation. Yeah, that's exactly where, and when we get to that point, I think we're best served to actually have more of a discussion amongst ourselves because we have thoughts. But first, before we go there, we do want to be clear on there is a difference between what the world is attempting to catechize us in this reality and what Scripture says. And if we recognize that difference, and we're fully understanding it, that will better equip us to answer that exact question and to deal with that. Yes, online question?
One, can the questions be repeated because they can't hear the audience?
Oh,
questions?
okay, yes.
And then second, are they living on pushing metaverse out of vision or monetary gain?
Are they pushing the metaverse out of vision or monetary gain? Both. And what I've read and what I've seen there's both. If you've studied the topic of transhumanism, this idea of transcending your body into another kind of existence, it's usually a technologically driven kind of existence. Some of the people that I've quoted here are part of the transhumanist movement, and they see the metaverse as a stepping stone towards that point when they can leave their bodies and be downloaded into a computer or an Android or whatever it is they're looking at as that preferred future. So in those cases, it is vision. They have a vision. They want to get somewhere. They've got a goal they're trying to go to. Others are simply seeing it as monetary because of the entertainment possibilities and the money you can make. There's massive military applications for some of these sorts of things. And there's money to be made in the entertainment industry as well. And so you've got, it's both of those. And there's some crossover between those individuals. They have both goals. And then there's people who are just one or the other. So yeah, good question. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin now.
Hi. I have a friend named Joe. This is a true story, but it's before the the metaverse even existed. I had a friend named Joe. I was working with him in a college outreach ministry for a Lutheran church on the East Coast. And we went on a trip to Virginia Beach with the college kids, and we were, hanging out on the beach and having fun. And Joe, who was usually kind of the life of the party kind of guy, was just sitting and looking down with his hands folded. And he wouldn't participate in anything. I said, Joe, what is going on? And he said, I just found out that my last name is a lie. I said, what? He said, my last name is a lie. My dad is a spy. My last name is one of his 6 created identities. I don't know who I am. How would you answer that? What would you say? Excuse me?
You're a baptized child of God.
Child of who?
Of God.
See, when it comes time to identity questions, our response is immediately to ground our identity in what God has done for us through Jesus Christ. Right? Listen to the language of the metaverse. They want to ground reality not in God and what he has done in Jesus, but instead in what humans are created for the benefits of other humans. And this is where the church really needs to understand what is going on philosophically, theologically, and with intent. And yeah, a lot of it's probably actually money making versus some kind of ideology. But in the end, what people are encountering is a reality in which God is not creator and Jesus is not the solution to the problems that we face. St. Paul had something to say about this. Colossians chapter 1 says this: Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. One of the things that the church is wrestling with right now is how do we talk to people who are in the metaverse? Because one of the benefits of the metaverse that many people like is that you can create your own identity or identities, and you can exist in a way that you would never exist in reality. You can exist in the metaverse. I know a person who has male and female avatars in the metaverse. He has Christian and Buddhist avatars in the metaverse. And he can have conversations and move between all these identities all the time and have experiences with these avatars. And as you just heard from Peter, not just experiences meaning reading words online, but actually have physical experiences. There was a court case that was brought up about sexual abuse in the metaverse, where an avatar sexually assaulted another avatar. The avatar, the person behind the avatar that was assaulted, tried to sue the person behind the avatar who did the assaulting, and their response was, I didn't do anything to you. There's no laws about what avatars can do to avatars in the metaverse. What jurisdiction does any government in the world play in the metaverse? It didn't happen on US soil. Now just think that through from our point of view as Christians. about what grounds our reality. Peter mentioned concupiscence. That's the fancy word to say original sin. There is no sin if there is no God in reality. What the metaverse encourages people to do is to see their lives not before God, but to see their lives only as it relates to other humans, with the primary goal of being happiness for the self. So when the church confronts a reality in which we are not coram Deo before the face of God, but instead living our lives as justified before other men, what's the gospel? Where's the gospel? One of the things the church can actually help with in the metaverse is to proclaim the truth of reality. And that is rooted in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. It is time for the church not to shy away from, but to proclaim our creedal confession. You heard Pastor Harrison say this morning in chapel. Homologeo. Let us confess. Let us say what God has said. Because when God speaks, he speaks about reality, not an invented reality, but the only reality that is. And so as the church is going to intersect with the metaverse, we have to understand that the view of humanity in the metaverse is really one that is removed from the physical reality of created beings. Now, think for a moment about all the life issues we care about. Without bodies, the argument changes. It's just a fetus. It's not a human body. Their usefulness is over because their minds aren't as sharp as they used to be. See, all these arguments do not treat humans as reality based on the way God has created us, which is body, soul, spirit. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23. Right? Now may God bless you, body, mind, and spirit. The metaverse encourages us to see humanity as only the representation of our minds. We have good news. We have good news for people who think reality is simply to get away from the bad things that I don't want to deal with. We have good news. The creator of the universe took on flesh, a real body, and he gives to you a real identity. Adoption as sons. So as we think about the reality of the church, we think about the church coming together to receive physical word and sacrament. The church is not just an intellectual idea of like-minded individuals getting together in whatever way possible. The church is a people of God gathered around word and sacrament with a physical pastor standing and delivering the holy absolution, administering the sacraments according to the will of God. And the people in the metaverse, whether they like it or not, whether they know it or not, they are real people given real bodies, real spirits, real souls by the Almighty Creator. And the church needs to help them find that that identity is where true salvation and true joy and true life is found. Okay, so that's kind of what Peter and I kind of, as we think about this, we want to make sure that that's our kind of confession in the light of all these things we're hearing. So any questions or thoughts on that part? And then we'll move into part 3, which is kind of practical application of all this. So any questions or thoughts on what I just walked through, kind of theologically? Okay, now it's your turn to ask questions of having heard all this, what are you thinking or what are you wondering?
So there are those who are, claiming to establish churches in the metaverse
Yes.
that people come to in their avatars come to. Yeah, what do you think on this? Have you?
So let's actually hear from them what they're saying.
Okay.
David Soto.
Well, actually, before we do that.
Yeah.
Peter and I presented to a bunch of
Pals.
pastors, they were all pastors. How many years ago now? 5 years ago?
At least.
And we talked about virtual baptisms and virtual communion and virtual congregations. They all did that. They said, that's never gonna happen.
Nope, that's crazy talk.
Then guess what?
We did it.
It's happening. So it's not just crazy talk. When we talk about these things, it's actually happening. And there are Missouri Synod pastors that are starting virtual congregations. So we're not just making this up.
Yeah. So let's real quick, I just want to go through a couple slides and then really give you guys a chance to talk. No, you have to stay up here because we're talking together now. Right? Yeah, you don't. We're in this together, Kevin. This is David Soto. He is not Missouri Synod. He's a standard American evangelical, non-denominational. I'm friends with him. I met him at a conference. He is the founder of VR Church. If you go to vrchurch.org, kind of. This is one of his few avatar attempts where he actually tries to look like himself in real life. He's got others that are like completely different. He has planted, I think, 12 virtual churches now in different worlds online. Final Fantasy, there's a church there, and I'm not even bothered to name them. Anyways, here's what he says. The fullness of the ecclesia, the gathering together, can be experienced in the metaverse. This means the metaverse church is not lacking in any way. So this is his starting point for how he sees church. He does do virtual baptisms. He was the guy that Kevin and I presented on 4 or 5 years ago with the PALS group. And they just thought it was absolutely crazy that somebody would do it. What I find interesting is even as David says this, he is still struggling with how to do virtual communion, which I find fascinating. So even the pioneers that are pushing this, and he's all in on virtual baptism, and that's in his mind completely legitimate. He is literally ordaining pastors virtually of all genders. That's kind of how his thing goes, and hasn't met them in real life in some cases, and he's ordaining them, sending them out to plant churches, but he has not yet figured out how to do online communion in a faithfully biblical way. I find that contradiction to be very, very fascinating.
There's an online question.
Yes.
Is it correct that those who want a perfect world actually are unable to achieve it? So the whole project is futile?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, if we want to get philosophical, that's what modernism.
Yeah.
We can achieve
well,
perfection through technology and advancement. And
So remember, this
progress.
is actually a very important point to make, and maybe we don't always understand these subtleties. But remember, modernism, the philosophical movement of modernism, was that science will get us to utopia. Okay, and then once the 2 world wars happened, postmodernism said, I don't think so. I think all of our progress is actually leading to dystopia. Now, the way you can actually see this manifested is in teen fiction. Teen fiction switched from utopian fiction, where everything's wonderful, and we have all these flying cars. You guys remember that stuff? It didn't happen by the way. We all thought year 2000 flying around in cars, right? That's all utopia.
2015 for sure.
But if you read the teen fiction that came out later, it all became dystopian. And this is exactly what happened, is that postmodernism replaced the utopian views of modernism with a dystopian reality of the future. Now, transhumanism is trying to go back to the utopian hopes of modernism and say that technology can actually return us to a utopian hope instead of a dystopian. And that's why the metaverse then is trying to create a utopian future, because we're trying to progress beyond the physical sciences that led to the dystopian realities of the futures of the cities and our communities and even the wars that we face. So now we're going to create a place that we can exist heading for utopia that we create using technology. You understand? You see that? So it's a major philosophical shift, and it's really interesting. Now, the fun thing is that a lot of the advocates of this are actually postmodernists. So you have postmodernism that gets rid of utopia. You have postmodernism goes back to utopia. And this is a lot of what philosophically is going on. And transhumanism is often how modernism and postmodernism get mushed together for this new movement towards utopia. Okay? Now that was just kind of a philosophical background, but that's what's going on, honestly. Okay?
Now, and as we're talking about language shift, I know as we've talked about this, we do tend to think, based on what Kevin said, well, we're a sacramental church body. Other sacramental church bodies who have the means of grace, who know how important it is to have physical means, well, they're not going to start going down this direction. Talking about the language games and the language shift. Fortunately, that's not true. The Episcopal church body, that would certainly be a sacramental church body. They are experimenting with online church. They had this first experiment of a church space that happened on Monday evenings. Monday nights, they'd have this online. It was initially like a prayer devotional sort of thing. They did that intentionally. This is backed by the national church body and one or two of their seminaries. So it's not just rogues going out there doing their own thing. And it went well, and they've continued doing it since then and are treating it like a church plant. This is one of our LCMS churches talking about their virtual reality experience. And it's important to note the language being used. And I bring this up not because I'm saying they've made the shift and they're bad now. No, this is an example of, do you realize the language you're using and what the creators of the metaverse intend by that language, and how you have adopted that language in your own conversations, in your own promotions of virtual reality, and what that could then communicate. I don't know the motivations and intent of this congregation as they are promoting their Easter experience, their full 360 as if you were there with us virtual reality experience for Easter. I don't know what I actually would assume their motivation is a very good one, where they're like, we just want people to be here in church, and this is one way. If they see this, maybe they'll want to be here in person and join us. That's what I actually expect this to be. But I do wonder, are they aware of, here's how the world and the creators of the metaverse and online experiences use that same language and what they intend with it. This is me creating a video about how to live stream your church when the pandemic hit. So I am not immune to this. I literally created a video helping any and all LCMS church that was not live streaming their services to get up really quickly on the easiest, most cost-efficient way to start live streaming their services during the pandemic. So nobody's immune to this. And then we did have and still do have the ongoing controversy about our own congregations wanting to conduct virtual communion and do online communion. Well, we're going to skip that one here. We'll land here and then do questions the rest of the time, please.
Isn't that impossible to do a virtual communion?
Yes, based on our definition of what church is and what the Lord's Supper is, yes. But remember, if you've accepted the shift in the language that we've been talking about, all of a sudden that will create a mental shift where you're like, maybe we can do this. If we're going to expand the words we're using to include these new definitions, that will have an impact on your theology. And I think that's a large part of what we're seeing happen with these congregations that are trying to do that. They've expanded the definitions of the word and accepted more into those definitions than Scripture itself does. This is how we define church in the Augsburg Confession: congregation of saints in which the gospel is rightly taught and the sacraments are rightly administered. There's not really any wiggle room necessarily for a virtual version of that, because it's not how Scripture talks. Yes.
I was only putting in a comment because you were talking about languages improving. I'm a church secretary, and when the pandemic hit, we went to the online, streamed our services. And until recently, on our website, we call that live worship.
Yeah.
We really need to change our language here
Yep.
because we need to encourage people to worship in person, so we changed it to streaming.
Yeah, and so a lot of congregations have kind of discovered this, right? Is that now that we're back in person, some are like, you know what? I like worshiping in my pajamas with a cup of coffee. I'm just gonna stay home and watch on YouTube. We're like, no, that's not what. But then you go to your website and it says, join us for worship. You know, and they're like, well, okay, I'll choose that option. And so we've started to change our language. A lot of church websites are like, we call it streaming worship, or we say, if you can't make it, this is better than nothing. You know, those kind of language, we're actually starting to shift our language because we've realized what these words mean.
Right.
So that's exactly right. And it's very important, right?
I don't understand virtual baptisms.
Good.
That's completely okay. So yes, to not understand virtual baptism.
I know water is not virtual electronics, so do they use virtual water?
So there are two ways to do online sacraments. There are really two ways that people do this. And if there's more, you can let me know. I don't want to know if there's one or two. One is that they actually have the person use physical elements wherever they are to themselves. Or somebody else.
While a pastor is
So
doing the
so while a
act
pastor is
virtually.
online, you're enacting it where you are. And that's kind of how the LCMS congregations in online community was. Everyone's got their own element in their living room.
Yeah, everybody get a piece of bread and a little cup of wine,
That kind of stuff.
hold it up to the TV screen.
The other way is to actually simulate the elements online. So there's simulated water in the metaverse that would be applied to an avatar, which is your character in the metaverse, by a pastor who is an avatar. So it's all happening in the metaverse. Nothing actually happens. You're just watching it on screen.
The
Or
way
participating through the VR controls.
The way DJ Soto does it, David Soto, is he actually has one of his churches has this big massive pool, virtual
Yeah.
pool, and the whole congregation will walk down into the pool and he'll be there in the middle with the person getting baptized, and the two avatars will mine through all the actions. And so the person, one of them is, I believe Sweden is one of the places where this woman is sitting and she's being baptized. So if you can visualize this, David Soto is in his trailer because he and his family travel around the country in an RV. And so he's standing in his trailer doing all the motions of, it's full immersion, by the way. That matters. Do full immersion. He's doing this motion with his body here in the US in his trailer. And she, with her avatar in Sweden, is going down however she can with her avatar, making her avatar go down. They're completely disconnected from each other, but they're each going through the motions. And remember, it's real if you can feel it. So if she has a good enough bodysuit, she can actually feel the water that she's in. If he has a good enough bodysuit, he can feel the water that he's in. Well, why isn't this real? Why not? If your experience defines reality for you and you have the full visual and physical experience of being immersed in the water, why isn't this real? And that's how you do a virtual baptism. Yeah. Question over here.
I find that really strange. Wouldn't that whole bubble be burst as soon as you got hungry?
Well, so that's.
I find it
exactly-
gets burst when all of a sudden they're really excited about meeting each other in real life for the first time. Which he will post on Facebook. This is one of our pastors. I ordained her. I've discipled her. This is our first time meeting in real life. This is amazing. This is awesome. And I'm like, why? Why is that awesome? You said everything is just as good in the metaverse as anything else. It lacks nothing. Why is this awesome now that you're meeting her face to face, physically in person? So yes, it does fall apart at some point.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Michael, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
There were two quotes that you had on slides.
That I went by fast.
One was from Pastor DeSoto, who said, in the online church, nothing is lack.
Yeah.
One immediately following that said,
Mhm.
online does not mean less real.
Right.
So that's David Adamson.
Now, that statement is one that we could actually agree with, right? Online does not mean less real any more than a conversation that takes place over telephone is less real than a conversation that takes place in
It
person.
depends what you mean by the word real.
Yeah,
Exactly.
as it depends on how we're defining our terms here. Yeah.
Right, and, but the problematic statement is that there is nothing left. Online does mean less physical, right? And I think that's where we run into problems. Now, we can laugh at the apparent ridiculously of a simulated baptism,
Mhm.
right? But as soon as you start to talk about a really effective bodysuit, it's more problematic than we might think,
Yep.
right? And it forces us to think through what is the real problem with this. And we are not well served if we come to the conclusion that the real problem with this is that it's different than what I'm used to,
Right.
right? That's not going to serve us at all, because the truth is, this technology is going to come to be a part of our life in some way. We're going to be much better serviced if we as Christians understand what are the ways in which we need to be hesitant, need to be cautious, skeptical, and then what are the ways in which it might genuinely serve the cause of the gospel, as for example, in the case of the pandemic, or even after the pandemic, when now we have, I would say in some cases, we have enhanced our connection with some homebound members, for example, ways that we were not able to connect with them before, not as a replacement, but as a supplement. So it's, I want to caution against sort of a reflex reaction that this is all hogwash.
Yes.
And encourage us to think through, okay, why do we have the convictions that we have? What are the genuine differences? And why are those not suitable for an incarnational view?
So if we could have a goal in this session, it's actually to get you started thinking about that, because this is 45 minutes to introduce something that I'm willing to bet, I mean, most of you said you weren't familiar with this at all. So this is the very introduction and showing you that contrast to get you thinking in those terms. Now, I will say this, the metaverse is one of the first pieces of technology in my lifetime that I've looked at that has developed and become available in my lifetime, where my questions about how or whether the church can be involved in it are much more serious and immediate and stronger than previous ones.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is that the metaverse continues our society's obsession with identity and continues to separate identity from God and his word, and continues to locate identity in self and choice. And the metaverse is becoming almost an instantiation of that trend, to where now I can create my own choice of who I am. And that sounds really appealing to our sinful selves that like to worship ourselves, but it's very empty when crosses come. And when you exist in a reality that's event that is really predicated on the theology of glory, and then all of a sudden you run into a cross and you don't have an actual theology of the cross, that's where people are going to be lost, broken, and in need of the true gospel of Jesus Christ, which we have. And we are going to drive them not to a metaverse setting of that gospel, but to an actual congregation where they have a pastor, right, who can sit down and look them in the eye. Does that make sense? So I think that's where we want to keep moving the conversation.
I think we're at time, so I guess one last question here, and then
It's gonna auto cut off.
it's gonna actually cut us off, so we'll cut off in the middle of the question. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. If we're using technology or can use technology to create our own reality around us, we become a creator of our own universe. for our own benefit, with our own identity. Isn't that like playing God?
Yes. Yeah, and so then, if you just think that through for a second, then what happens if something goes wrong? Who's gonna save you? See, salvation that is not outside of you, it's inside of you. You then also have to become your own savior. And so this is why this is such a fundamental problem, is there really is no gospel in that created universe, right? And so not only is it self-idolatry leads to being totally, completely lost. And if you look at the numbers of those who are really into these kinds of things, social media and the metaverse kind of stuff, the numbers are not good for long-term survival, right? I mean, this is suicide numbers are going way up, you know, all those kinds of things. And so these, as we live our lives, not only with our own sin, but also surrounded by the sinfulness of this world, we're continuing to be reminded, you know, you hear it in the Sermon on the Mount, you hear it at the end of Matthew's gospel, is that the church continues to bring this gospel of Jesus Christ into these dark places, recognizing that they're dark, why they're dark, and that real people are hurt in this. And those are real people for whom Jesus was incarnate, lived a perfect life, gave himself on the cross, rose from the dead, ascended, and will return. And we want to bring that to those real people, recognizing, right, exactly what's going on, right? That they're trapped in this world of self-creation, denies a creator, but also denies a savior. Okay. And one way to look at this, actually, we'll work this through with your congregation or other people, is kind of just walk through the creed. Right? What do we confess? What do we all stand shoulder to shoulder on Sunday morning and confess? Right? The 3 articles of the creed. And just think this through with all these issues. And what is our confession in light of this?